Hello. So, thanks for the generous introduction. As he said, I spent the past few years working on a report for the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects activity. If you're familiar with DARPA, IARPA is the sister agency serving the US intelligence community. And that report was designed to look at the intersection of artificial intelligence and national security, to find where these technological trends are taking us in military power. I had a speech prepared for you today that was to go through that report almost line by line and share with you my conclusions. I have decided to throw that speech in the garbage after yesterday's presentation. This strategy, as you can imagine, is rather high risk, high reward. And if you'll excuse what I have sacrificed in terms of polish and formality, I hope to make up for in terms of honesty and frankness. Because I believe yesterday's presentations leave us with a conversation that we need to have about artificial intelligence and national security. That this is not merely just another technology that is going to affect national security. This is a transformative technology on a par with the invention of aircraft or electricity. More than that, it has the potential to be a disruptive technology. And while there were some amazing presentations yesterday, none of them actually talked about disruptive innovation theory. As the introduction mentioned, I went to Harvard Business School, which is the home of disruptive innovation theory, and its creator, Clayton Christensen, was my professor. And so I will borrow from him to talk about why disruptive innovation is meaningful here. It is not a synonym for a big change. Disruptive innovation does not merely mean a large technological change. In fact, it is a specific theory referring to in what types of situations status quo powers are likely to lose in competition, and in what types of situations status quo powers are likely to win. Now, Professor Christensen was specifically thinking about the business context, but I believe that this book, The Innovator's Dilemma, ought to be required reading at every military academy in the world. Because this theory is incredibly powerful in giving us the tools to analyze technology and where we believe those trends should take us. So let me introduce some terminology, if you'll excuse me. The first is sustaining innovation. This is the type of innovation that makes a better mousetrap. It works better, it moves faster, and it has higher performance. This is the type of innovation that is very attractive to the high end of the market, your customers who are most willing to pay. The second type of innovation is disruptive innovation, which goes after the low end of the market. The performance of the product is objectively worse than what it is replacing, but it is good enough for low-end consumers. Disruptive innovations begin with products that are, excuse my French, crappy. They nevertheless take hold in the market because they are cheap and convenient. So let's use one of the canonical examples of disruptive innovation, which is the film and digital camera transition. A sustaining innovation would be like the transition from black and white film to color film. It's an improvement over the existing technology, it's objectively better, and you'd be willing to pay more for it if you could. A disruptive innovation is like the transition from film to digital. Because recall that when digital cameras first were invented, they were far, far worse than film cameras. The pictures were blurrier and had lower resolution, the cameras were heavier, and overall it was a more difficult system to use. In fact, but they had two principal advantages. That they were cheap if you took lots of pictures because you didn't have to buy any film. And moreover, they were convenient because you could look at the image you had just taken right after you took it and know whether or not it was good enough and you needed to take another one. What's amazing is that this disruptive innovation going after the low end of the market, the people who didn't want to pay a ton of money for film, ultimately disrupted the film industry and its incumbents. Kodak, a company that had dominated the photographic film industry for over 100 years, ultimately declared bankruptcy. And why? Because in the film industry, they were producing at profit margins of over 80%. But when digital cameras came along, they rode the consumer electronics industry with profit margins of 3%. So the winners in the digital camera industry tended to be companies like Sony, who viewed digital cameras as an exciting new expansion of the consumer electronics market. whereas Kodak viewed digital cameras as a frightening turf war that would reduce demand for photographic film. This is what disruptive innovation theory gives us, is a notion of in what types of competitions are status quo leaders likely to win and when are they likely to lose. Because the magic of a disruptive innovation is that the optimal strategy for the status quo power is actually the long-term one that leads them down the worst path. For instance, in Kodak's case, if digital cameras are going after the low end of the market, that increases their temptation to focus on the high end of the market. Folks like professional photographers or movie cameras that have the need for the utmost performance. That has the best profit margins and can secure their business, while they leave digital cameras to take the low end of the market, which is the least profitable for them overall. But slowly but surely, performance of digital cameras creeps up at a faster rate than that of film cameras. And every time you sell a digital camera, you are reducing overall demand for photographic film. And as a result, you have this enormous fixed asset base, factories producing photographic film, and every time you take away demand, then that fixed cost is spread over lower and lower product volume. So why do I bring up disruptive innovation theory in its specific and precise form? Because if you apply it to military theory, it again gives you a prediction of when status quo powers are likely to win or likely to lose in a new frame of technological competition. Right now in the world, the United States is the status quo military power. It has the best technology across an astonishing portfolio of military capabilities. Areas like nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and fifth-generation fighters or cruise and ballistic missiles. These systems are incredibly capable, but they are also incredibly expensive and complicated. Counterintuitively, for the United States, this is good. We love that our military systems are incredibly expensive and incredibly technologically complicated because we have a lot of money and we have a lot of very smart engineers. So if the basis of military competition comes down to who is willing to spend the most and who has the best technological engineers, we think we can win those types of competitions. The reason why disruptive innovation theory is therefore frightening is that it says that the future of military technology competition may hinge upon a different basis. The ability to make use of innovations that are crappy, but cheap and convenient. Take as just one example, the Tomahawk cruise missile. This costs $1.5 million per shot, not including the cost of the launcher. It can deliver an explosive payload over the course of hundreds of miles to a precision of within a few meters. In April 2017, America launched a strike of 60 Tomahawk cruise missiles against Syria. The overall attack cost $100 million. This is incredible performance, but it comes at an incredible cost. But now think about a poor man's equivalent of the Tomahawk cruise missile, a consumer drone. As we heard yesterday, there are drones in the pipeline with ranges of tens of miles or hundreds of miles that cost as low as $500. You may say that these are a crappy substitute for the Tomahawk cruise missile, but this is precisely my point. They get cheaper and more capable every year. Would you rather ride the cost and innovation curve of Augustine's law, where an aircraft cost $5,000 in 1920 and costs $140 million today? Or would you rather ride Moore's law, where the performance-adjusted cost of a personal computer has fallen by 95% over the past 15 years? Militaries with incredibly high-performance systems are at risk of looking at commercial technology innovations and saying, these aren't as good as what I have now, and therefore they're not relevant to my mission. What they should be thinking is the exact opposite. These aren't as good as what I have now, but wow, they are cheap, and wow, they are available to my adversaries who cannot normally get access to these types of capabilities. We are already seeing ISIS in Iraq and Syria use drones to create a poor man's air force. Suddenly, they have airborne intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. Suddenly, they have airborne precision strike capabilities. They are nowhere near as good as what the United States and its allies are fielding, but they are riding the consumer electronics cost curve and performance curve, not the aerospace cost curve. Over the long term, and even in the near term, this has the potential to reshape the foundations of global military power. Which now brings us to artificial intelligence. AI technology is a general purpose technology. It is not a single capability that once you have it, it fundamentally changes your national power. That would be something like nuclear weapons. Instead, AI is a lot more like electricity, which in its early introduction to warfare had a diverse set of capabilities, some of which were revolutionary, such as radio, and some of which are merely evolutionary, such as the substitution of electric bomb detonators for lit fuses. AI will be the same way. It will deliver a portfolio of capabilities, some of which will be revolutionary and some of which will be evolutionary, but a huge chunk of which have the potential to be disruptive military innovations, in that the availability of commercial AI technology will give non-state actors and non-peer competitors, and even peer competitors, easier access to capabilities that they would normally be denied. This is the essence of disruptive innovation. So as I said before, in my report, I went through the areas where I believe AI is likely to make a dramatic impact on military power and national security. I want to focus on a few here today, which is the future of military superiority and the future of intelligence superiority. In military superiority, I see two important areas. The first being robotics and autonomy. In 2004, a book was written by a Harvard and MIT economist talking about the future of work in an era of computer automation. And they held up one canonical example as what they believed was indicative of what computers would never be good at and what you could reliably depend upon as the future of your employment basis. That example was driving a car. They said that making a left turn into ongoing traffic was so complicated, so defied a listing of ordered rules, that no computer could ever come up and figure it out. They were correct with the basis of computing technology that existed then, which was a programming paradigm of sequential instructions. Ultimately, before the modern machine learning revolution, every line of code in a computer was typed out by hand by someone, a series of instructions executing in the order that they are prioritized. The magic of the modern machine learning revolution is that the systems are, to a certain extent, programming themselves based on exposure to data. So while you and I would struggle to write down every single rule precisely of how to make a left turn into ongoing traffic, by giving the system 10,000 examples of us doing it, it can devise those rules for itself. And thus, the modern machine learning revolution forces us to take our assumptions about what computers can and cannot do and throw them out the window. Suddenly, new tasks are amenable to automation that only a short number of years ago would have been impossible. Driverless cars are simply the tip of the iceberg. In my perspective, when I try to imagine what the future of military power looks like, I spend a lot of time thinking about nature and the capabilities that it has proven possible. I hope you're all familiar with the term of an existence proof, which is the simplest way to end an argument about what is or is not possible in technology. Before 1900, there was a large community of folks who said that it was impossible for anyone to ever build a propelled aircraft that could hold a human person. Once the Wright brothers were actually flying these aircraft, the argument was over. There was an existence proof. I view nature as a sort of existence proof, as what is possible in the future of robotics. Consider the Canada goose, which can fly 1,500 miles in a single day without refueling at an average speed of over 60 miles per hour. Snow geese form flocks that are clouds 12 miles long. They literally blot out the sun when they fly past, and they can cover similar distances at similar speeds to the Canada goose. How would an aircraft carrier battle group respond to millions of small drones with kamikaze explosives flying slowly but at incredible distances and striking at any time with the ability to loiter. We don't have to argue about whether or not these capabilities are possible. They already exist on planet Earth. And while the drones that we have today do not have those capabilities, as I said before, they get cheaper and more capable every year. The invitation is out there to experiment, and the modern AI revolution means that these drones can operate at a level of autonomy and performance that simply has been unheard of in military robotics in the past decades. The second area I think it's very important is cybersecurity. Mike Rogers, the current head of the United States National Security Agency, said in October of 2016 that artificial intelligence will be foundational to the future of cybersecurity, and I believe he is absolutely right. His speech came only 2 months after DARPA's Cyber Grand Challenge, in which teams constructed autonomous cyber-physical systems that could discover cyber vulnerabilities in their adversaries and exploit them, and at the same time discover cyber vulnerabilities in themselves and patch those vulnerabilities, all operating without a human operator. This was merely the Stone Age of what I believe that we should expect to see in the near future of AI applied to cybersecurity. There's a host of incredible possibilities here for what can be done, whether that be automated red teaming and software verification and validation testing, increased automation and reduced labor requirements of any kind of cyber operation, or used to discover new vulnerabilities and new attack vectors. This is an amazing set of capabilities in cyber that we should expect to see in the very near future. Next is information superiority. I think that we should take a step back and consider the example of Stasi in East Germany. The Stasi had 102,000 members surveying a population of only 17 million East Germans. That's one spy for every 166 people in the country. That's how labor-intensive surveillance used to be in the past. But now we see that with modern computing capabilities, and especially with machine learning capabilities, the amount of data that we're receiving is finally amenable to automation. It used to require humans, but now it doesn't necessarily do so. The United States intelligence community collects more data every day than all of its staff could analyze if they spent their entire lives upon it. If we cannot introduce automation, then the vast majority of this data will simply go unanalyzed and ignored. But with machine learning, again, it challenges our paradigms of what we believe is amenable to automation. Previously, it was almost impossible to write software code that could tell you, that could recognize a face in an image or recognize an animal in an image. And suddenly, we can now build AI systems with better than human performance. What is true in imagery is also true in audio data. There are now AI systems that are higher performing than the human ear in recognizing spoken words. And a host of others. In the military domain, I believe that we will in the near future see AI systems designed to exploit every type of data, whether that be optical, infrared, radar, acoustic, natural language, documents, spoken words. These massive data sets that our intelligence communities have been collecting but don't have the staff to analyze, AI offers an opportunity to automate that in a way that has not been possible before. And of course, right now, the capabilities, by and large, are crappy. But they're also cheap and getting better at an extraordinarily fast pace. And so if you simply look at the capabilities we have today and say, they're not as good as what I'm using now, you're missing the point. The second area of information superiority where I believe AI will be critical is strategic deception and propaganda. In the same way that AI can be used to analyze data in order to generate insights, it can also be used to generate data in order to deceive. For instance, an AI system exists already that could sample the voice that I have been speaking to all of you, run that through a machine learning algorithm in order to deduce what is the fundamental properties of my voice. What does it mean for me to speak? And then that AI system could generate my voice speaking any words that you can type into a computer. That could be me confessing to a crime. That could be me saying incredibly inflammatory things. At the moment, these systems sound a bit tinny and robotic. Even the untrained ear can say that they're probably fake. But at the pace that they're making progress, we should expect that we are 5 years at most from them being able to fool the untrained ear. Over the longer horizon, they will be able to fool certain types of forensic analysis. This poses an incredible challenge to command and control organizations. You probably don't realize the extent to which you are using the human voice as an authentication technology. You know that it's someone because it sounds like that someone, and you know that it's impossible to replicate their voice. But that's simply not the case in the future. What is true in audio is equally true in video. It would be possible to create a similar video of me, again, confessing to a crime. So the implications here are incredibly diverse. Think of the future of courtroom evidence, corporate communications, journalism, and even international relations. I think back to, for instance, the Watergate scandal in the United States, which brought down Richard Nixon. Most people forget that investigative reporting uncovering wrongdoing was ongoing for 2 years, and yet there was still not sufficient support in the Senate to impeach and remove from office Richard Nixon. Only on the day that the audio tapes of him acknowledging and ordering the criminal actions were released did his support within the Senate evaporate. Imagine what would happen in a world in which it is very easy to fabricate those types of tapes. We will struggle to know who to trust. We are already seeing actors in the international system who are more than willing to use these types of capabilities maliciously. During the 2016 American presidential election, according to the Computational Propaganda Institute at Oxford University, fake news actually was shared on Twitter in a 1-to-1 ratio with real news. That's what we're dealing with in terms of fabricated text. But usually when one person argues one side and another argues another side, HD video or recorded audio is a tiebreaker. Nixon says he did not commit a crime. We say you probably did, but now there's tapes, and so this argument is over. But in the future, this will not be the case. And intelligence organizations like the Internet Research Agency of Russia, which have already shown adept skill at fabricating text and photographic evidence, are now going to migrate into these new domains. Command and control organizations will have to think about how to secure communications and operate in this environment and this information ecosystem that has a lot more malicious intent. So I'd like to ask, how fast precisely are these changes occurring? Well, the answer is far faster than expected. In 2014, the expert who had built the world's best Go playing computer program said it would probably be a decade until a system was able to beat a human champion. Instead, that decade came 9 years early, and the achievement occurred only 1 year later. This is leading experts in AI radically underestimating the progress in their own field. And how big are these changes? Well, the leading technology companies of the world report that they are remaking themselves around AI, remaking themselves, optimizing every aspect of their organizational structure to take advantage of these transformational capabilities. Just as one anecdote that is rather illustrative, at Google, the AI team now sits directly next to the CEO. And why would they do that? Well, Google acquired a company called DeepMind in London for $500 million. This is the same company, DeepMind organization, that achieved the AlphaGo results that I mentioned to you previously. That $500 million acquisition, Google estimates, repaid itself after their first project, which was using AI technology to optimize energy consumption in data centers. Literally, the first project they did with AI paid for itself. That's how precious the people who have the skill set to develop advanced AI systems are. PhDs, newly minted PhDs in this field, routinely command salaries in the private sector of $300,000 to $500,000. I mean, the capabilities that they give are absolutely transformational to an organization. And what is perhaps most shocking and most challenging for the militaries of the world is that these advances are overwhelmingly coming out of commercial industry. In the nuclear and aerospace era, the best scientists worked for governments or for companies that were closely allied to governments. The best technology was possessed exclusively by governments, and most research and development funding came from government organizations. That world is so far gone as to be unrecognizable. I can say, and this is not any kind of disclosure of classified information, but there is no super secret laboratory in the US government developing super advanced AI that is way better than Google. They are behind the commercial private sector, and frankly, it's not close. In the West, commercial companies with leading AI capabilities have been reluctant to assist national security organizations. In the wake of the Edward Snowden revelations and Donald Trump's election, this has become harder, not easier. But in China, it's a very different story. Intimacy between commercial AI companies and military is deep. In fact, it's the official policy of China's national AI strategy released in July of 2017, which calls for a military-civil fusion strategy, where leading technology companies such as Alibaba or Tencent or Baidu work hand in hand with the government and its military organizations. China's national AI strategy calls for matching the West's technology and artificial intelligence by 2020, and leading the world in artificial intelligence technology by 2025, and dominating the world in AI technology by 2030. When China released this strategy, there were many who said that China can't innovate, they can only copy. That may have been true 15 years ago, but it bears no resemblance to the technology landscape that we have today. In fact, maybe Facebook was making fun of Chinese tech companies 10 years ago, but only last year they confessed that many of the most recent Facebook innovations were actually copied from Chinese social media networks like WeChat. This is the world in which we live. There are many international computer science competitions, and Chinese scientists often win. Chinese companies are producing legitimate artificial intelligence advances. For instance, the first company with an AI system that could recognize the human voice at above human ear performance levels, that came out of China. And the list of innovations comparable to that is quite long. So if you think that China cannot secure a leading position in artificial intelligence technology, the simple fact is you're wrong. And former Google CEO Eric Schmidt said exactly this at my think tank's conference in November 2017. He said, if you think that there is something wrong with the Chinese government system or the Chinese education system that cannot produce these types of AI revolutionary people and technologies, you're wrong in the present tense, and you're likely to be far wronger in the future. Eric Schmidt explicitly said that China's national AI goals of surpassing the United States and the West in AI technology was credible, perhaps even likely, absent major government action. What is China's advantage in this? It's primarily strategic focus and funding. Leadership all the way up to Xi Jinping has announced that this is a top priority for the nation. In fact, his summer reading list included many books written by Western computer scientists on artificial intelligence. And the amount of funding that they are willing to commit to technologies that they identify as of strategic national importance is extraordinary. Consider their semiconductor plan, which in many ways resembles the rollout of the national AI strategy. In 2014, I was reading a semiconductor industry analysis that said, well, China probably can't lead in semiconductors because they're so far behind, they would probably have to lose at least $100 billion in order to catch up to the state of the art in countries like Korea. Only a few months later, China announced the funding figure for their national semiconductor strategy, and it was $150 billion. When they identify a technology as of critical national importance, their willingness to prioritize and fund is extraordinary. And that is exactly the focus that they are placing on artificial intelligence technology right now. And it is extremely frustrating, frankly, to me, as a scholar working in these areas, to see some of my own recommendations to the US government be implemented by the Chinese government first. So take, for example, the Defense Innovation Advisory Board's recommendations in 2017 that said the Department of Defense should create an AI institute, something vaguely analogous to a Los Alamos National Laboratories or a Sandia National Laboratories, but focused on AI technology. That was a recommendation made a year ago. Well, in January of 2018, China announced that they were creating an AI institute, and their initial funding level was $2.1 billion. And the American government still has yet to produce an AI institute or anything approaching a policy towards that. We are past due. and it is extremely frustrating to watch our recommendations be implemented by China faster than in the West. Perhaps most worrisome of all is the fact that China recognizes the essential disruptive nature of AI technology. If you recall, the US's third offset strategy said that we were going to use AI and autonomy technology to maintain America's leading edge in military technology. China's national strategy is a rebuttal to this document. It says that instead, AI is a leapfrog technology, meaning that because of AI technology, we do not need to invent or to match you in many of the sources of your existing military technology advantages. So perhaps China will decide that they don't need nuclear-powered aircraft carriers because of where they see autonomous drone technology going. Or maybe they don't need advanced sixth-generation fighter technology because of where AI technology in surveillance and reconnaissance will take them in long-range precision strike. That's what they mean by a leapfrog technology, is that instead of matching you in your existing military capabilities, we will develop alternative, cheaper routes that make those advantages irrelevant, and perhaps even weights that hold you down. Think again of the Kodak example. Every time you're selling a digital camera, you're reducing global demand for film technology, which means as you get stronger, you make your competitor that much more uncompetitive. The very strength that they have in film technology is the weight that holds them down as they try and pivot to digital camera technology. The same is true for artificial intelligence technology. The West has extraordinary advantages in a host of military technology domains. But if we focus on our existing advantages, we will prioritize readiness and neglect modernization such that our old technologies weigh us down. The most recent defense budget of the United States was a readiness-focused budget, overwhelmingly. It had goals such as a greater than 300-ship US Navy. And to me, this was an extraordinary mistake because it would be equivalent to Kodak in 1990 announcing that they were going to build a much larger film processing plant or film manufacturing plant, doubling down on the state-of-the-art technology of this era while neglecting to realize that the technological trends already ongoing are likely to make those advantages questionable or perhaps even disadvantages. Think, for example, of German and steel companies in the 1960s. They outcompeted American companies basically because they had been blown up in World War II. So after World War II, they had the opportunity to design their steel industry from a clean sheet. Whereas the United States saw innovation from a, how do we take our existing steel factories and make them better? Germany and Japan had the luxury of being behind, the luxury of saying, if we were starting a steel industry from scratch, what would we do? And then they did it, and it was extremely painful for the United States steel industry as they lost their competitive advantage. China has sort of a similar advantage of being behind. They do not have 13 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. They do not have the F-35 or the F-22, the most advanced fighters in the world. But because they are behind, they have the luxury of designing from a clean sheet, of questioning whether or not those capabilities will even be relevant in the near future. With AI, I suspect strongly that many of the capabilities upon which the United States and its allies draw their key advantages today will not be relevant in the enduring future. So now I want to bring this back to disruptive innovation theory. And Professor Clay Christensen, the father of disruptive innovation theory, does have a prescription for what organizations should do when they are facing this type of challenge. The first insight is that you cannot necessarily trust your existing organizations to navigate this challenge. Perhaps this sounds difficult, but I would remind you that in 1942, the head of the US Army Horse Cavalry wrote a very lengthy memo to the Army Chief of Staff arguing for the urgent need to increase spending on horse cavalry. In general, people who have organizations that are dedicated to utilizing a military technology will be the last people to realize that that technology is increasingly irrelevant. So instead, what Professor Christensen recommends is that you set up a new organization who is restricted to making use of only the disruptive innovations and tell them to fight like hell to put the existing company out of business. This would be the equivalent of Kodak setting up a new group that was only allowed to focus on digital camera technology, and the CEO saying, I realize that you're going to hurt my existing business. That's the point. I want you to do that because that's what will make us an enduring and survivable organization going forward. The militaries of the West need to replicate this insight. They need to create AI-first organizations who can acknowledge that some of what they're going to do is going to actually, in the short term, make the armed forces that they support weaker by exposing vulnerabilities in the systems upon which they rely. But if they succeed in exposing these vulnerabilities, well, then you'll be ahead in the disruptive innovation. You'll get to the future first, and you can scale the new technologies and tactics as you divest the old. And if these new organizations fail, great. Then you know that your capabilities are future-proof, at least for now, and at least until the next disruptive innovation. This is the true insight of disruptive innovation, that you must disrupt yourself or be disrupted. In the public sector, this is extremely difficult. In the US private sector, we believe that our entrepreneurial ecosystem is the best at harvesting disruptive innovation because we are willing to let companies go out of business. This is the nature of creative destruction, that we allow the capitalist ecosystem to tell us what is the right way to run our economy. But in the public sector, this is extraordinarily difficult, both because we have missions to execute today that are often life or death in stakes, but also second, because the organizations are mandated by Congress. And many of the technologies upon which US national security depends are underpinned by a 50-state strategy, which is to say that their manufacturing and servicing is designed for a political outcome, maximizing support in the United States legislature, not for a military technology outcome. In a sense, our existing military technology ecosystem is designed to prevent creative destruction. And if we allow this, then it is almost certain that we will be overtaken by other military powers that are willing to deal with these trade-offs and are willing to go to the future first. That does it for me. As I said before, this was a high-risk, high-reward strategy of working from just scratch. But I want to say that these are the real stakes of artificial intelligence technology, that it really is the future of military power, and it does demand reform across military organizations in the tactics, strategies, resources, processes, and priorities that they use to set themselves up for failure or for victory. The stakes could not be higher, and it's very important that we get it right. Thank you.